My name is Tessa Morales. I'm 31 years old, and until last year I worked as a scheduling manager for a small medical transport company in Flagstaff, Arizona. I made $46,200 a year before taxes, which sounds oddly specific until you realize that when you don't make much, you know the number down to the dollar. I drove a sun-faded 2012 Toyota Corolla with a cracked dashboard that expanded every summer like it was trying to escape the heat, and the driver's side window made a grinding noise that suggested it had one good year left in it, optimistically. I rented a modest apartment with beige carpet and a view of a parking lot, and I believed, honestly, stubbornly, that my mother loved my brother and me the same way. I thought love was evenly distributed, like inheritance should be. I thought fairness was the default setting in a family. I was wrong about that, and about a few other things. My dad, Victor Morales, was a high school shop teacher in Sedona. He had thick forearms, permanent sawdust in the cuffs of his flannel shirts, and a voice that never needed to be raised to be heard. He was the kind of man who could look at a crooked shelf and fix it without making the person who hung it feel small. When I was little, I followed him around the garage like a shadow with a ponytail. I held flashlights. I handed him screws. I learned the difference between Phillips and flathead before I learned long division. He taught me how to read a level, how to wire a basic switch, how to sand with the grain instead of against it. If something's crooked, he'd say, tapping the wood with his knuckle, it's because someone rushed it. That sentence ended up applying to a lot more than wood. When I was 22, he died. Stroke. Fast and unfair, and completely out of sync with the man he was. He'd been drinking coffee at the kitchen table that morning. By afternoon, he was gone. No will, no long speeches, no last-minute instructions, just paperwork and casseroles and a silence in the garage that felt like the air had been vacuumed out. Under Arizona law, everything went to my mom, Elena. At the time, that felt normal, logical. She was his wife. Of course it went to her. I didn't think about future implications or asset distribution or what everything really meant. I was grieving. Mateo was 26 then, all easy smiles and half-finished ambitions. My younger brother had charm the way some people have allergies, constant and impossible to ignore. He tried real estate for 8 months, photography for 6, crypto for 3 very intense weeks. Nothing stuck. Mom called it finding his path. I called it quitting before it got boring. Still, I never thought she loved him more. 2 years after Dad passed, Mom sold our house in Sedona. The house with the wide porch and the workshop out back where I'd spent half my childhood. She told us it sold for $410,000. She cried when she said it. Said she couldn't walk past the garage without feeling like the walls were staring at her. I hugged her and told her I understood. I didn't question the number. I didn't pull public records. I didn't think to. She was my mother. That was enough. Looking back, I realize how quiet I was in those years. I handled things. I paid my own bills. I didn't ask for help. I didn't need cosigners or rescue plans. I figured if something was broken, you fixed it. That's what Dad taught me. Mateo, on the other hand, called Mom about everything. Taxes, rent, car trouble, career pivots. She mistook that dependence for closeness. I mistook my independence for security. Until my 31st birthday. Mom invited Mateo and me to dinner at her new place in Scottsdale. It was a sleek condo with white countertops and a balcony overlooking a golf course that looked aggressively well-watered. She made enchiladas, poured wine like it was a celebration, and announced she had gifts for both of us. Mateo grinned before she even finished the sentence. I remember thinking it was sweet. I remember thinking maybe this was one of those moments families talk about later with warmth. I had no idea it was the beginning of the correction. Mateo got his gift first. Mom reached into her oversized leather purse like she was pulling a rabbit out of a hat and dropped a set of keys onto the glass dining table with a little dramatic flourish. "It's in Tempe," she said, smiling directly at him. 2 bedrooms, gated community, pool, gym, close to everything. Mateo stared at the keys like they were glowing. She went on about how she'd invested $350,000 so he could finally have stability, a real base to build from. He stood up and hugged her so hard her wine sloshed over the rim of her glass. I clapped. I meant it too. I was happy for him in that reflexive big sister way. I assumed my turn would come with something equally thoughtful, just maybe different in style. Then she slid a plain manila folder across the table toward me. Inside was a deed, a 1952 adobe house on the outskirts of Winslow, 2 hours east of Flagstaff. Population under 10,000. I'd driven through it exactly twice in my life, once on the way to Albuquerque, once when my Corolla overheated and I had to sit at a gas station for an hour, pretending that was the plan. The house had belonged to Dad's aunt decades ago. I vaguely remembered a story about it being kept in the family, which in hindsight should have set off alarms. "It needs some love," Mom said brightly. "But you're practical, Tessa. You'll know what to do with it." Translation: Mateo needs the shiny thing. You can handle the hard thing. The county had it assessed at $78,000. I drove out that weekend to see it. The closer I got to Winslow, the flatter the land became, stretching wide and indifferent under the Arizona sky. The house sat on a dusty lot with a sagging chain-link fence and a yard that looked like tumbleweeds had unionized and claimed squatters' rights. The stucco was cracked in spiderweb patterns. Roof tiles were sun-bleached and uneven. One shutter hung at a permanent angle of resignation. When I unlocked the front door, heat rushed out like I'd opened an oven. The swamp cooler rattled, but didn't cool. The air smelled like dust, dry wood, and something faintly feathery. The wiring was ancient, two-prong outlets, brittle insulation. In the living room, one corner of the wall gave slightly when I pressed it. Termites had turned it into something that felt suspiciously like corkboard. And then there was the attic. I heard it before I saw it, a slow, deliberate rustle. I pulled down the ladder, shined my phone light upward, and locked eyes with a barn owl who looked deeply offended by my existence. She blinked once, as if to say, "You're early." I named her Dolores on the spot. She did not approve. I stood in the center of that living room for a long minute, hands on my hips, dust floating in the sunlight, slicing through cracked blinds. I could have called Mom and said this was a mistake. I could have asked if she was serious. Instead, I felt something else settle in. Stubbornness. It was broken, yes, but it was mine. My name on a recorded deed. No landlord, no shared walls, no upstairs neighbor vacuuming at midnight. I had $18,500 in savings. Not a fortune, but not nothing. That first night, I dragged in a folding card table I'd brought from Flagstaff, set up my laptop and made a spreadsheet. Every projected cost. HVAC replacement, electrical rewiring, stucco repair, roofing patch, pest control, specifically owl relocation services, because Dolores was not signing a lease. The kitchen table that came with the house wobbled when I leaned on it, so the card table became command central. I logged mileage from Flagstaff to Winslow, 116 miles each way. Gas estimates. Material costs. A column labelled unexpected disasters, because Dad taught me there's always one. For 6 months I commuted. 2 hours east on Monday mornings before dawn, 2 hours back Friday nights after dark. I slept on a thrift store mattress on the living room floor because the bedroom smelled like insulation and regret. I showered at the community gym in Winslow until I got the plumbing stable. I learned how to patch stucco from YouTube at midnight with earbuds in and a notebook open beside me. The swamp cooler was declared officially dead by a local HVAC tech who looked at it like it was a museum exhibit. I found a refurbished unit through a retired contractor named Hank, who lived 3 houses down. Hank was 72, widowed, built like a refrigerator, and perpetually suspicious of anyone under 40 holding power tools. The first time he saw me on the roof in July heat, trying to assess loose tiles, he shaded his eyes and shouted, "You're either brave or stupid." "Both," I yelled back. He grunted. The next morning he showed up with a sturdier ladder. We started with the electrical. The old wiring was a fire hazard waiting for a hot afternoon. Hank didn't sugarcoat anything. "This place isn't bad," he said, crouched near the breaker panel. "It's just been ignored." That sentence felt uncomfortably familiar. We rewired the kitchen first, grounding every outlet properly. I held the flashlight the way I used to for Dad, steady and close. Hank noticed. He didn't comment, but he didn't take the light from my hand either. I tore out the cracked linoleum in the hallway, expecting more termite damage. Instead, I found original concrete underneath, solid, stained by decades of life, but structurally sound. I rented a polisher, spent 2 full weekends grinding and sealing it. When the final coat dried, it gleamed like river rock after rain. Dolores vacated the attic sometime in month 3 after I sealed entry points and installed proper vent covers. I like to think she left with dignity. Every evening, I updated the spreadsheet, every receipt scanned, every dollar accounted for. While Matteo was posting poolside photos from his new townhouse, I was sanding mesquite slabs on my back patio, turning reclaimed wood from a rancher near Holbrook into butcher block counters. Dust in my hair, hands blistered, sunburn creeping up my neck. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't easy. But for the first time since Dad died, I felt like I was building something instead of just reacting to what had been taken away. My name is Tessa Morales. I'm 31 years old, and until last year I worked as a scheduling manager for a small medical transport company in Flagstaff, Arizona. I made $46,200 a year before taxes, which sounds oddly specific until you realize that when you don't make much, you know the number down to the dollar. I drove a sun-faded 2012 Toyota Corolla with a cracked dashboard that expanded every summer like it was trying to escape the heat, and the driver's side window made a grinding noise that suggested it had one good year left in it, optimistically. I rented a modest apartment with beige carpet and a view of a parking lot, and I believed, honestly, stubbornly, that my mother loved my brother and me the same way. I thought love was evenly distributed, like inheritance should be. I thought fairness was the default setting in a family. I was wrong about that. And about a few other things. My dad, Victor Morales, was a high school shop teacher in Sedona. He had thick forearms, permanent sawdust in the cuffs of his flannel shirts, and a voice that never needed to be raised to be heard. He was the kind of man who could look at a crooked shelf and fix it without making the person who hung it feel small. When I was little, I followed him around the garage like a shadow with a ponytail. I held flashlights. I handed him screws. I learned the difference between Phillips and flathead before I learned long division. He taught me how to read a level, how to wire a basic switch, how to sand with the grain instead of against it. If something's crooked, he'd say, tapping the wood with his knuckle, it's because someone rushed it. That sentence ended up applying to a lot more than wood. When I was 22, he died. Stroke, fast and unfair, and completely out of sync with the man he was. He'd been drinking coffee at the kitchen table that morning. By afternoon, he was gone. No will, no long speeches, no last-minute instructions. Just paperwork and casseroles and a silence in the garage that felt like the air had been vacuumed out. Under Arizona law, everything went to my mom, Elena. At the time, that felt normal, logical. She was his wife. Of course it went to her. I didn't think about future implications or asset distribution or what everything really meant. I was grieving. Matteo was 26 then, all easy smiles and half-finished ambitions. My younger brother had charm the way some people have allergies, constant and impossible to ignore. He tried real estate for 8 months, photography for 6, crypto for 3 very intense weeks. Nothing stuck. Mom called it finding his path. I called it quitting before it got boring. Still, I never thought she loved him more. 2 years after Dad passed, Mom sold our house in Sedona. The house with the wide porch and the workshop out back, where I'd spent half my childhood. She told us it sold for $410,000. She cried when she said it. Said she couldn't walk past the garage without feeling like the walls were staring at her. I hugged her and told her I understood. I didn't question the number, I didn't pull public records, I didn't think to. She was my mother. That was enough. Looking back, I realize how quiet I was in those years. I handled things. I paid my own bills. I didn't ask for help. I didn't need co-signers or rescue plans. I figured if something was broken, you fixed it. That's what Dad taught me. Matteo, on the other hand, called Mom about everything. Taxes, rent, car trouble, career pivots. She mistook that dependence for closeness. I mistook my independence for security. Until my 31st birthday. Mom invited Matteo and me to dinner at her new place in Scottsdale. It was a sleek condo with white countertops and a balcony overlooking a golf course that looked aggressively well-watered. She made enchiladas, poured wine like it was a celebration, and announced she had gifts for both of us. Matteo grinned before she even finished the sentence. I remember thinking it was sweet. I remember thinking maybe this was one of those moments families talk about later with warmth. I had no idea it was the beginning of the correction. I didn't sleep much the night after that phone call, not because I was confused, but because something in me had shifted permanently. For most of my life, when my mom applied pressure, I adjusted, I bent. I found the compromise that kept the peace. That night, lying on the thrift store mattress I still hadn't replaced out of sheer stubborn practicality, I realized I didn't feel the urge to bend. I felt anchored. The next morning, I drove to Flagstaff and paid $400 to sit across from a property attorney named Lauren Pierce. Her office was small but precise, clean desk, labelled files, diplomas aligned perfectly on the wall. She had sharp eyes and the kind of handshake that communicates you won't be talked over. I handed her the deed. She read it carefully, flipping pages without rushing. "This transfer was voluntary," she said finally. "Signed by your mother, notarized, recorded. There is no lien, no co-ownership, no clause tying it to any conditional agreement." "So she can't just take it back?" I asked. Lauren's mouth twitched slightly. "Property law doesn't operate on feelings. She has no legal claim." The relief I felt wasn't dramatic. It was quiet and steady, like a bolt tightening into place. "However," Lauren continued, "people who can't win legally sometimes escalate emotionally. Document everything. Texts, calls, any threats. Install cameras if you haven't already." I nodded. I'd already thought about it. On the drive back to Winslow, I pulled over at a rest stop outside Winslow and opened the county property records website on my phone. I don't know why I did it then. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the same instinct Dad had when he double-checked a measurement, even if he trusted himself. I searched the Sedona house. Sale price $468,000, not the $410,000 Mom told us. I did the math twice, $58,000 unaccounted for. I stared at the screen while semis roared past on the interstate. The desert wind rattled the restroom doors nearby. I felt something colder than anger settle in my chest. Not shock, not even betrayal in the dramatic sense. Just clarity. The unevenness I'd sensed for years suddenly had numbers attached to it. I screenshotted the record and emailed it to myself. Then I drove home. That weekend, I installed 4 security cameras. One above the front door, one covering the driveway, one in the backyard near the pergola, one aimed at the side gate. I changed the locks, added a deadbolt. Hank watched from his yard for a while before wandering over. "Storm coming?" he asked, nodding toward the ladder I'd propped against the house. "Something like that," I said. He didn't push. He just handed me the drill when I needed it and steadied the ladder without being asked. I also called the Navajo County Sheriff's non-emergency line and calmly explained that there might be a family misunderstanding involving property access. The dispatcher took notes, gave me a reference number, and told me to call if anyone attempted forced entry. 3 weeks passed with nothing but silence. Then on a Thursday morning at 11:42 a.m., a moving truck turned onto my street. I wasn't home. I was sitting at Hank's kitchen table, coffee in hand, my phone propped against a sugar bowl with the camera app open. I'd had a feeling something would happen soon. Mom had stopped calling. Silence from her was never surrender, it was strategy. Mateo stepped out of the passenger side of the truck first. He looked uncertain, not triumphant. Mom followed in her SUV, already on her phone, voice animated in that performative way she uses when she wants witnesses. I watched as Mateo tried the front door. Locked. He knocked. Nothing. Mom walked up, knocked harder, then tried the handle herself like maybe the lock would reconsider. My phone buzzed. "Lauren." "She's here," I said quietly. "I'm calling her now," Lauren replied. Through the camera feed, I saw my mom's posture stiffen when her phone rang. She answered. I couldn't hear Lauren's voice clearly through the outdoor mic, but I didn't need to. I watched my mom's expression change from confidence to irritation to something closer to disbelief. She paced the driveway, free hand slicing the air. At one point, she pointed at the house as if the walls were misbehaving children. Mateo stepped back, confusion replacing whatever expectation he'd arrived with. The 2 movers, young guys who clearly thought this was a routine job, shifted uncomfortably. One of them said something I couldn't hear. The other shook his head. Within 5 minutes, the movers climbed back into the truck. Mom ended the call and tried the side gate instead. Camera 3 caught her tugging at the latch, the padlock held. Hank stepped onto his porch, coffee mug in hand. He didn't say much, just loud enough, "Ma'am, I wouldn't." That was enough. Mom stood there for a long moment, staring at the house like it had personally betrayed her. Then she walked back to her SUV. Matteo followed. They drove away. The entire scene lasted 12 minutes. I didn't feel victorious. I felt confirmed. That evening, I sat at my mesquite counter, opened my laptop and drafted one email. I addressed it to 14 family members. No emotion, just facts. The deed, the timeline, the $72,300 in receipts, the security footage stills, and one final attachment, the public record showing the Sedona house sold for $468,000. I hit send. I wasn't trying to win an argument. I was leveling a crooked shelf. The email detonated quietly. That's the thing about facts, they don't shout. They just sit there, solid and inconvenient. Within 30 minutes, my phone started lighting up. Not with rage, not with accusations, with silence broken by hesitation. My Aunt Lucia texted first. I didn't know about the sale price. My cousin Daniel followed with, "There has to be an explanation." There wasn't. Not one that made arithmetic disappear. 2 hours later, Matteo called. I almost didn't answer, not because I was angry at him, but because I didn't know which version of him I was about to get. The defensive golden child, or the brother who used to build Lego cities with me on the living room floor. I answered. He didn't waste time. "Did the Sedona house really sell for $468,000? Yes, a long pause. I could hear traffic in the background, maybe Phoenix, maybe Tempe. "She told me $410,000, he said finally. "She told me that too." Another silence, heavier this time. Why would she lie about that? There are moments when you realize someone else's worldview is cracking in real time. I could hear it happening to him. "I don't know," I said, which was both true and not. I had theories, I had suspicions, but I didn't have proof of where the $58,000 went. I only had the absence of it. He didn't defend her. That was new. 2 weeks later, I heard through Aunt Lucia that Matteo had tried to refinance the townhouse. The HOA had imposed a special assessment for structural repairs, roofing issues, plumbing in shared walls, things that sounded expensive and unglamorous. The market had cooled. Comparable sales were coming in lower than what Mom had paid. The investment wasn't growing. It was bleeding. He listed it anyway. The offers came in under $330,000. Mom had paid $350,000. Between closing costs and fees, Matteo would walk away in the red. For years he'd been shielded from consequences by cushions he didn't know were there. Now the cushions were gone. He sold it. Moved into a modest rental in Phoenix. Took a steady job managing inventory for an outdoor gear company, less flashy than real estate dreams, more consistent. He texted me one night a photo of a warehouse aisle stacked with backpacks and said, "Turns out I like organizing things." I stared at that message for a long time before replying, "Dad would have liked that too." We didn't talk about Mom much after that. We didn't need to. There was an unspoken understanding settling between us. We weren't enemies. We'd just been positioned that way. Mom called me once during that stretch. Her voice was sharp, not syrupy this time. "You embarrassed me," she said. No apology. No acknowledgement of the numbers, just wounded pride. "I corrected the record," I replied. "You've torn this family apart." The accusation hung there. I looked around my kitchen while she spoke, the mesquite counters, the clean lines, the sunlight catching the concrete floor. "No," I said calmly. "I didn't." She hung up. The family group chat never recovered. The people who had rushed to defend her went quiet. A few apologized privately, others simply retreated. I wasn't interested in public vindication. I just wanted the air cleared. Meanwhile, Winslow kept being Winslow, dry mornings. Long pink sunsets over red mesas. The rosemary out front thrived. The pergola cast steady shade across the patio where I now had actual patio furniture instead of folding chairs. Hank still wandered over unannounced, usually with commentary about whatever I was fixing or improving next. One evening, about 3 months after the moving truck incident, Hank and I sat outside watching a dust storm build on the horizon. He took a sip of his beer and said, "Families don't fall apart because of truth. They fall apart because of lies." It was such a simple sentence, so practical. Dad would have approved. I realized then that I wasn't angry anymore, not in the hot, reactive way. I felt something closer to distance. Mom had built a dynamic where Matteo was fragile and I was resilient. She fed one and relied on the other. But resilience doesn't mean surrender. It means endurance. And endurance had turned into ownership. The house felt different now, not just legally mine, but emotionally settled. I replaced the thrift store mattress with a real bed. Hung framed photos in the hallway, including one of Dad in his workshop, smiling at something off camera. I like to think he'd approve of the concrete floors, the solar panels, the careful lines of the pergola beams. Matteo came to visit again, this time without filming. He stood in the living room, hands in his pockets, taking it in quietly. "You did all this?" he asked. "Yeah." He nodded slowly. "I get it now." We didn't elaborate. We didn't need to. Later that night, after he drove back to Phoenix, I sat under the pergola alone. The solar lights flicked on one by one along the stone path I'd laid myself. The air cooled, the desert settled into its nighttime hush. Some people think fairness is about equal distribution. I've learned it's about equal accountability. Mom chose her version of stability. Matteo is learning his. And I chose to build something no one can reassign with a phone call. The house behind me stood quiet and solid in the dark. Not a gift, not a favor, a foundation. It's been a year since the moving truck pulled onto my street and left 12 minutes later with nothing but wasted gas and bruised pride. Time has a way of sanding down the sharpest edges of a moment, the way I sanded the mesquite slabs until they were smooth enough to run your palm across without catching. What's left now isn't anger. It's perspective. Mom and I don't talk much. When we do, the conversations are careful, like stepping across loose stones in a river. She's never apologized, not directly. She's mentioned misunderstandings. She's referenced stress. Once she even said, "I just wanted what was best for both of you," which is the closest she's come to admitting anything without actually admitting it. I don't argue anymore. I don't present evidence. I already did that once, and it was enough. The truth is out there now. It doesn't need to be repeated. Matteo and I talk more than we ever did before. Not daily, not dramatically, just steadily. He's been at the outdoor gear warehouse for almost a year now. He likes the structure, the inventory systems, the predictability of knowing what's coming in and what's going out. Turns out, he told me once over coffee when he drove up to visit, I'm better at maintaining things than chasing things. I smiled when he said that. Dad used to say maintenance was underrated. Anyone can start something. Not everyone can sustain it. Winslow feels different now too. Not because the town changed, but because I did. I switched jobs 6 months ago, found a remote scheduling role for a regional hospital network. No more 2-hour commutes. No more living in 2 places at once. My desk sits near the front window now, sunlight spilling across the polished concrete floor every morning. I drink my coffee looking out at the terracotta planters instead of a parking lot. The house has settled into itself. Adobe walls hold temperature like memory, cool in summer, warm in winter. The solar panels hum quietly with purpose. The pergola beams have darkened slightly with time, the stain curing into something richer than when I first brushed it on. I planted a small mesquite tree out front this spring. It's only shoulder high now, but it's taking root. Slowly, steadily. Hank still comes over most evenings, sometimes with beer, sometimes with nothing but commentary. He's taken to inspecting my projects like an unofficial building inspector. You did that right, he'll say, tapping a joint or a corner, and that's praise enough. A few months ago he handed me a small wooden box. Inside were a set of old chisels. Victor would have liked you having these, he said. I didn't trust my voice enough to respond properly, so I just nodded. There's something about building that changes how you see people. I used to think love was measured by what someone gave you. A house, a down payment, a safety net. Now I think it's measured by what they trust you to carry, and whether that trust is honest or convenient. Mom trusted me to handle the hard thing because she thought I'd never push back. She thought resilience meant compliance. She thought I'd smooth over the uneven boards and hand the finished structure back with gratitude. She underestimated something. Resilience isn't quiet obedience. It's endurance with boundaries. A few weeks ago I got a letter in the mail from her, handwritten. That alone caught my attention. She didn't ask for the house. She didn't mention money. She wrote about Dad, about how he used to stay up late in the garage, how he worried about both of us in different ways. She admitted, carefully, that she might have confused helping with controlling. It wasn't a full apology, but it was the first crack in the wall. I don't know what happens next. Maybe we rebuild something. Maybe we don't. Some structures aren't meant to return to their original form. Sometimes you reinforce what's salvageable and let the rest go. Tonight, I'm sitting under the pergola again. The desert air is cool, carrying that faint mineral scent it gets after a dry wind passes through. The mesquite tree's leaves rustle softly. Solar lights trace the stone path I laid piece by piece. Through the window, I can see the reflection of the room I rebuilt. Clean lines, grounded outlets, counters smooth and solid. I think about the girl who first unlocked this door and stood in a room that smelled like dust and owl feathers. She had $18,500, a spreadsheet, and more determination than she knew what to do with. She thought the house was a consolation prize. It wasn't. It was a test. Not of whether I could fix stucco or install panels or negotiate property law. A test of whether I'd keep shrinking myself to fit someone else's version of fairness. I didn't, and that's the part that matters most. The house stands behind me now, quiet and steady under the Arizona sky. Every board measured, every wire grounded, every wall reinforced. It's not impressive because of its value. It's impressive because it holds. So do I. Some people hand you something broken because they assume you'll either fail or give it back polished and grateful. What they don't expect is that you'll keep it, that you'll turn it into something strong enough to stand on its own. Once you build something with your own hands, once you reinforce the foundation and square the corners, it stops being a story about what you were given. It becomes a story about what you chose to keep. Life will sometimes hand you the cracked version of fairness and expect you to say thank you. Don't. Measure twice, build once, document everything, and never confuse resilience with surrender. The work you put in becomes your leverage, your proof, your peace. And if you enjoy stories where boundaries are reinforced like load-bearing walls, subscribe to the Revenge Protocol YouTube channel and drop a comment. We read receipts and comments.